first image is of the guy on an old-fashioned looking bike riding through, I think it's near Green Park, with the London Eye behind, and a very classical, very traditional London viewpoint, so to speak. So with regards to settings, obviously the lens was 35mm. It was the 35 f2 that I was using throughout the video. The aperture was at f2 because I just wanted a softer look, and also wanted to have either the foreground or the background out of focus. Shutter speed was at 1/1000, and that's in order not to get any motion blur. And then ISO was at whatever it had to be to get the correct exposure. Now, the reason I really like this particular image is because there's nothing really there that I can see that can date it, such as a face mask or a phone, AirPods, stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, I think dated images are fantastic, but in some cases it's nice just to get a timeless type of photo. And because he's not like a classic bike, it kind of just goes well with the whole feel of the image, also being black and white. Now, I focused on the background because I wanted him slightly out of focus, which again, I just think adds a little bit to the image to make it feel a bit older than maybe it is. Now, the second photo I really like is of the three guys on skateboards in South Bank. There are a few reasons I like this photo. The first one is because there's quite a lot going on. So one of the guys has just landed a jump, the other guy's about to do a jump, or an ollie, or whatever it's called, and the third guy's kind of just chilling out, watching it all happen. The background is very plain, so it's very easy to focus on the skateboarders rather than focusing on what's in the back. Also, I think the image overall is balanced, so there isn't anything which kind of skews the image to the left or to the right. I think the skateboarders are spaced out nicely. Now, I know it was a complete fluke. I physically couldn't space them out like that, but then that's, I guess, part of street photography. You have to wait for the right moment. So settings, shutter speed was at 640. Try and get, you know, the skateboarders fairly in focus, or not in focus, so fairly sharp and without motion blur. Aperture was at f2. ISO is at whatever it has to be to get an overall good exposure. Now, talking of exposure, I tried to keep this fairly balanced because I didn't want the background, which is white, to be completely blown out and look completely blown out. So I kind of underexposed it a little and then just brought up the shadows of the skateboarders. So that's the second one. Now let's look at some pictures which I didn't think were that good. So the first photo I didn't like, and I didn't really think it was good enough, was of this cleaner at the end of this tunnel. So basically, I can't remember exactly where in London it was, but there was this tunnel which looked quite cool, and it was leading into a housing estate or a block of flats of some sort. And at the end of the tunnel was a guy cleaning the floors. Now, I remember when I was looking at the scene, it looked quite good. I thought, you know what, it'll look really cool. You know, so he's like sweeping the floor and you've got the tunnel and all that sort of stuff. However, when I looked at the back of the camera, I was a bit disappointed, and then I thought I'll leave it. And then when I obviously got the image into Lightroom, I was like, oh, it just looks a bit boring. I don't know why. And then after studying it for a bit more, I can figure out why. So the tunnel is very prominent. It's very obvious you're in a tunnel. However, the cleaner is very small. It's like a tiny little dot in the distance almost. And I think your eyes immediately go to the tunnel. They try and go forwards to see what else is there. Sort of the tunnel's leading your view, so to speak. And because the cleaner is so small, it kind of like throws everything off balance, because you expect like a bigger payoff at the end, but the payoff is very small, and you have to really like concentrate and like proper like look at the screen or at the image to understand what it could be. So I think if I were to repeat this exact scene, I would probably get a longer lens, maybe like a telephoto, for example, like a 70 to 200, something like that. Go further back and then zoom in, because what that would do is that would sort of exaggerate the size of the cleaner and then kind of compress them against the tunnel, so overall creating a more balanced image. Because at the moment I just think that the person is just too small for the scene. Now, sometimes it's good, don't get me wrong, sometimes having a small person in a big scene can show a sense of scale. However, here I don't think it does. I think here it kind of just looks a bit odd. So that's the main reason I don't like it. There is definitely potential in that image, However, I used the wrong lens. Obviously I didn't have a choice, I didn't have like a zoom in my bag or anything, but yeah, long story short, that's why I don't like it. The final image that I don't like and I don't think is very good is taken just behind Piccadilly, and it's another one of those where you see a scene and you think, you know what, this looks great, but when you take a picture of it, that scene that you saw and the picture you saw in your mind just doesn't translate into a 2D image. And to be honest with you, that happens more often than it doesn't, because one thing that I've learned over the years, and everyone will learn, is that a good view doesn't always translate into a good image. But anyway, I'm going off track. Why do I not like it? Very similar reasons to the previous one, where there was a guy in the middle of the road, and the image I was going for is this empty road, like old London looking type of place, and this one guy who was proper smartly dressed, and he was like in the middle of the road. By the time I got there and took the image, I think he kind of moved, but even so, I don't know, it just feels a bit strange. It feels like the whole thing's just very much off balance. It feels like he's so small that he's just getting lost in the detail, and overall it's very unclear, at least to me looking at this photo, what the main subject is. Now, if I were to change something, I don't know, maybe a longer lens would work, but I don't think it will actually, because if you use a longer lens, all you're going to do is compress him against the background, whereas it was more of the foreground interest that was interesting in that image, not so much what's all the way in the back. So it kind of, unless I stood all the way back and maybe done it in landscape, so that maybe you could compress the sides a bit, but it's, I don't know what I would have done differently on that one. The only thing I do know is if there was like a more simple, cleaner background, that could have worked, or just if he stood closer to me. So I think that was probably the main downfall, is the fact that it was so far away that even if I used a longer lens, it just wouldn't have looked right. Either myself would have had to get closer to him, or he would have had to get closer to me to make that shot work. But then it might not but then it also might not work, because you kind of lose the surrounding area and the context. But basically, wrong place, wrong time, wrong subject, wrong area, everything combined, and the image just doesn't work. Not to say that it's completely rubbish, pretty sure it's something I'll happily share on stories and stuff like that, but it's not something I would particularly be proud of. But it's also good to learn from, so doing these little videos and analysing my own work is also good to learn, and you should probably do the same. Anyway, I am definitely chit-chatting now, so I'm gonna probably end the video here. As a quick recap, I used the Fuji XT4 for the entire shoot. I used the 35mm f2. It's probably my most used prime lens. I absolutely love it. In terms of the black and white side of stuff, the reason I went for black and white is because I fancied it, but also it was a proper cloudy day, and what I find on cloudy, overcast days, I just don't get the photos I want in colour, not unless it's raining. So black and white, I usually get the results that I want on a cloudy day. In terms of black and white and the editing side of stuff, generally what I try and do is make sure that each image has a few pixels that are complete black and a few pixels that are complete white. So basically the entire sort of spectrum of lightness, if that makes sense. I just think that kind of brings the black and white image to life a bit more, rather than having something that's very flat. So yeah, that's everything top of my head. So I'm definitely over the time. So thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, this little chat helpful, give it a like. If you have questions, comments, write them down below. I would get back to you as soon as I can. And that's it. Thank you, hope you're well, have a good week, and see you in a bit.